Hello, everyone. Welcome to your Parajumbles 101 with Akash. And let's dive straight in with a question and understand the tips and strategies that we need in our prep for CAT and specifically for Parajumbles. So let's start with a question. So always a question starts with five sentences uh, or four sentences labeled as A, B, C, D, E given in this question. When properly sequenced, form a coherent paragraph. Decide on the proper order of the sentence and key in this sequence of five alphabets as your answer. So what we have to do is we have to arrange these sentences to create a meaningful paragraph that that tests our ability to construct a proper sentence. In all, it tests our grammatical skills. All right. So the tips are, let's start reading the sentences and figure out keywords in the sentences, which will let us know that this sentence will be an opening sentence or an ending sentence. All right. A says the judgment is important not simply because it got rid of an archaic and patriarchal law. The judgment. Now, we had learned basic questions to ask: who, which, where, why, how, when, what. So this judgment, what judgment, who passed it? In the first sentence, it's not really clear what kind of judgment it is, who passed it. All we know that it's a very archaic and patriarchal law. Now, to dive into the vocabulary, archaic means outdated. It's not applicable anymore. Patriarchal means which relates to patriarchy, like matriarchy and patriarchy. That way, even if you don't understand this vocabulary, it's totally okay. Some kind of law, let's say some kind of law. The judgment is important, not simply because it got rid of a law. B says, but also because of its consequences for the future. Now, I want you to focus on the words like not simply and but also. These words always come in a pair, like either or, neither nor. They always come in a pair, not simply and but also, and they show similarity. Similarity of what in this case, in this context, judgment. This pronoun it is used as a hook for the judgment. The judgment is important not simply because it got rid of a very old law, but also it is important because of its consequences for the future. Now, I know that A and B are in pair. A starts and then B goes on. I want to figure out D, C, and E also. Where can I place them? Can I place them in before A and B or after A and B? Let's see. I'm very sure A and B are not the opening sentences because they don't carry the information, what kind of judgment, who passed it, what consequences. So I'm very sure they will not start the paragraph. Now, moving on, C says, Section 497 of the IPC, what section it entails, what law it entails, part of the British enacted Penal Code of 1860 criminalized adultery. Okay, that was the law that was passed by the British in a very old time, 1860, which criminalized adultery. Okay, we are getting some context here. What the judgment could be about. Now, D says on September 27th, a five judge bench of the Supreme Court struck down Section 497 of the Penal Code and decriminalized adultery in India. Now I get the whole context, what happened. The story, the beginning of the story is D. Now, I want you to focus on a very important concept of grammar here in the language is that we always, whenever we start a paragraph, we want to talk about a context, we start with a date. Then with the subject. Subject was the section 497. And then what happened with it? Now I know the whole context. D has to be the starting of the paragraph. Now, section 497 is explained in C. On 27 September, a five-judge bench struck down 497 and decriminalized adultery in India. And 497 was a part of British enacted Penal Code of 1860, criminalized adultery. So D starts the paragraph. C carries forward the subject's information, which is section 497 had criminalized adultery, which is C. And then let's read E. But, which is a contrast keyword, They are connectors. They are also called connectors. When you want to put in two contrasting informations together, you would use connectors like but, however, although, nonetheless. There are many. So we'll get on to that. I'll provide you a list of key indicators which can make you know that if a particular sentence is a introduction, is a generic or a general sentence, is it a conclusion, is it an assertion, is it an assumption, is it a reason or a premise given for the assumption. So when we cover all the aspects of grammar and vocabulary, which is also knowing the key indicators, I'll just show you in a while what do I mean by key indicators. It gets really easy to judge what sentence talks about or what meaning the sentence carries. So E starts with a contrast keyword, but they did so asymmetrically. That is, only the man and not the woman who engaged in adultery could be punished. That's why they had decriminalized adultery, because old law, the archaic or patriarchal law, had criminalized adultery, but only for the man, not for the woman. So they had revised the law by passing a judgment and saying that it's not good for the future consequences. So I'm very clear. D starts the paragraph. C continues the context. E gives us the assumption for the conclusion, why the judgment has been passed. Now, my answer is D, C, E, A, B. Now, what did I learn in this? Just give me a moment. All right, let's move on. What did we learn in this? We learned that whenever we see dates coming in, we always keep that sentence at the opening of the paragraph. So that's a basic rule of sentence construction. Now, if the date comes in the context, please keep the date in the starting. Like, for example, in 1947, India got its independence. That would be a better grammatical structure than saying India got its independence in 1947. So the listener has to wait for the complete information of the time reference. So if you give the time reference in the beginning, the listener or the reader is very clear about what to follow and in which context to follow. Now, so that's why we keep the dates in the first. They are called time markers. So in 2008, during the 19th century, recently, these are all time markers, right? Lately, earlier, these are all the words that we know from very beginning. Recently, earlier, later, these are time markers, and they often introduce a timeline or a context. It's very important to know, and they always start the paragraph. Generic statements are like, which gives us like sun rises in the east, education is important for everyone, there should be equal rights for man and a woman in the labor force. These are generic statements. Definitions and introductions are which gives us an introduction to a concept or a task. Contrasts are very important in the language and sentence construction because they carry the tone, they carry the information which is contrasting to what was previously said. So if a sentence starts with a date, time, or generic statement, it likely begins the paragraph. Please note this point. Whenever you see a date, a time, or a generic statement, it likely begins the paragraph. To continue the information, we would add words like however, but, I really like to go on a trek with my friend, but I feel too tired. Now, they are two very contrasting information. I really like to go walking, but I feel tired. So that gives us two layers of information with the help of the word but, which is under the key indicators, which this is what I was talking about. There are key indicators that we need to follow or we need to learn. We already know these words in English. It's just that we need to know the application and a quick application because CAT is what? A time-based test. We need to solve 24 questions in a given amount of time, which is 40 minutes, right? So to think, to ponder upon what was the concept in grammar, which you already know exactly, but to click it, to click there itself in the test center, when it's mostly needed, comes only with a good amount of practice. And I'm not saying the practice would be very, hard on you. It would be the words that you already know, like however, but, yet, on the other hand, you just need to know the applications of it now. There are other keywords like cause and effect. There are words, negation tone keyword, positive tone keywords. There are many. We'll cover them over the course. All right. Let's understand a little bit of other pronouns. Let's say in this context, we had the judgment, and then the pronoun for it was its consequences. It's right. So while reading in an intuitive way, when I reach because of its consequences, my brain should connect that its consequences means the judgment. This happens, this reading skill or comprehension skill comes with some practice and good understanding of our keywords, right? Keywords could be anything in this context. Let's say in this subject, in this particular chapter, subject continuity, we are looking at pronouns. The smartphone revolution began in the late 2000s. It changed the way humans interacted with technology. What is it here? The smartphone revolution. That's the subject. It's easy to catch context of the jumbled sentences if you are really thorough with your keywords. And these keywords, we've been speaking time and again, I'm saying this, we've been speaking all our lives. There is nothing that we don't know. All right. For a good paragraph construction, we would need this context, an introduction or a general sentence, then a body sentence, specific, giving examples, and then a conclusion. Whenever you face a parajumble question, please take care of the time markers, the pronouns, the connectors. If you can find the solution, if you can find the summary or the conclusion quickly, mostly it will be at the last of the paragraph. So we'll keep the summary or the conclusive tone by the end of the paragraph. Please don't memorize anything. There is nothing to memorize anyways. It's a language related test. You have to go with your intuition. Your intuition can develop over time only with a lot of good practice, a structured practice, not random practice, a structured practice where you know which keywords are used in a grammatical way to write a good flow of paragraph in English or in any language. That will make you stronger in getting good marks in verbal ability.